They were just doing their thing. Could have left it alone, but he said, no, let's change it up a little bit. Let's throw people into the mix. Great, people. Now that's a crisis. That's a change that brought a crisis, because now you got relationship issues. Now you got Adam and Eve and that whole tree thing, and that, the fruit and the getting cast out of the Garden of Eden. That's crisis right there. But God says, no, I'm not going to leave them alone there. I'm going to change things up a little bit. And so he sends Noah. Evan Almighty. He sends Noah to build this ark, and the flood comes, and all these nasty people who've been just completely opposed to God, they all get wiped off the face of the earth, which, by the way, is a crisis brought about by God's need to change the circumstances. And so now that he's got a fresh, clean slate, he starts over with Noah and his family. God could have left him alone. Could have said, okay, right, we're done. We started over, we got a clean slate. Go ahead and do your thing. I'm going to go play golf. But he doesn't. He says, let's shake it up a little bit. Let's make some changes. And so he finds this guy named Abraham, and he walks up to Abraham, comes up to Abraham and says, Abraham, I'll make you a deal. I will be your God if you will be my people. In other words, God says to Abraham, you give me all of yourself, and I will give you all of myself. Now, that's a crisis. Because, see, in order for Abraham to take God up on his offer, he has to lose himself. He has to say, okay, God, you can take control of my life. But the change might be worth it. Because now Abraham could say, I have all of God accessible to me. All of God's resources, his power, his might, everything that God is accessible to me. Now that's change. It's a crisis, but it's change. Hopefully for the better. And then, hundreds of years later, about 400 or so years later, Abraham's people, his descendants, now find themselves in Egypt living a prosperous life. God has blessed them well. They have multiplied numerically. They're Israelite Hebrew people as far as the eye could see in the land of Goshen in Egypt. They're everywhere. And God could have left it alone. But he said, let's change it up a little bit. And what God does is he sends, or he allows a new king to come into power. And the new king does not like the Hebrews. And the new king notices how powerful they're getting, how numerous they're getting, and he says, we're going to stop this. He enslaves the people. And so now, you've got all of God's people in slavery. But remember the promise God made to them? He said, if you will be my people, I will be your God. If you will give me all of yourself, I will give you all of me. And now they're in slavery. God could have left them alone. But he said, no, let's change it a little bit. And so he sends Moses and Aaron to go to Pharaoh and say, let my people go. You've heard the phrase. Let my people go. And Pharaoh says no. The king says no. And so 10 terrible plagues later, the Pharaoh finally says, all right, get out of here. I'm sick of this. I'm sick of you. Go. And then God leads the people away from Egypt. And then God leads the people back for one more change. Look with me at Exodus 14, verse 1. Then the Lord said to Moses, tell the Israelites to turn back, and encamp near Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea. There to encamp by the sea, directly opposite Baal-zephon. Pharaoh will think the Israelites are wandering around the land in confusion, hemmed in by the desert, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them. But I will gain glory for myself through Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So the Israelites did this. Now, the first thing you have to notice here is that the Israelites are free and clear. Moses has just led them out of Egypt. They've just spent a couple chapters talking about the preparations for leaving and the process of leaving, and then they've spent a few verses telling us the direction that they left. They left to go through the desert because if God had led them according to right along the edge of the Mediterranean Sea, there were people living there who were stronger than them and might defeat them. So God led them to a path of safety around the evil people, even though it went through the desert. Now, there's a story in that altogether, but here is the most amazing thing to me. God says to these people who are free and clear, ready to take off and to go to their promised land, He says, go back. You ain't going to get me to go back. I'm gone. I've left the life of slavery behind me. I'm taking off. God says, go back. Now, He's not telling them to go back far. Just go back a little bit and encamp near the Red Sea. The Red Sea is a little area that sort of goes right along the coast of Egypt, right along the coast of Africa, the east coast of Africa, and it basically almost, but doesn't exactly meet up with the Nile River right when the Nile River comes into the Mediterranean Sea. So here's the Red Sea coming up to this side, and it's got two little arms that stick up off the top, and God probably led them to one of these arms off of the side, and He says, camp there. Aren't they supposed to be making a getaway? To move on to their promised land? God says, no, hang out for a little while by the sea. This is the first thing that fascinates me about this. It's that God brought them to a crisis moment. Read the rest of the verses with me, all the way through verse 12. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds about them and said, what have we done? We've let the Israelites go and have lost their services. So he had his chariot made ready and took his army with him. He took 600 of the best chariots along with all the other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, so that he pursued the Israelites who were marching out boldly. The Egyptians, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots, horsemen and troops, pursued the Israelites and overtook them as they camped by the sea near Pi-hahiroth, opposite Baal-zephon. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone? I don't think they did. Let us serve the Egyptians. It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. This is a crisis as it were of biblical proportions. They are facing the entire army of Pharaoh, the number one army in the ancient world. They are facing him in front of them. And to their backs